What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets Central podcast. And the Mets make a couple of moves, not ones that everyone's going to be excited about because it's just depth moves, while other teams around them are making moves. The first baseman market's heating up, so that could point to signs that we're going to get a resolution on the Pete Alonso stuff sometime soon. Who knows? But we got a lot to get into. Before we jump into everything, please be sure to leave a like on your way into the stream. Subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. We really would appreciate that, as we are trying to get to 500 subscribers before opening day. I never said anything about that goal, but I'm making it a goal now. So let's see if we get the 500 subs before opening day. So I would appreciate if you could, or share the stream, any of that stuff. But yeah, we got a lot to get into today. But Matt, how we feeling with the off season going so far? Before we start talking about, of course, all the players that the Mets have acquired.
Yeah, definitely a good start to the offseason. Obviously, we're still hype about Juan Soto. Obviously, it's kind of died down a little bit because we're expecting some more moves to come now. Yeah, as you mentioned, first base market has heated up a little bit. Obviously, Paul Goldschmidt signing yesterday with the Yankees, Christian Walker heading to the Houston Astros on a 3-year, $60 million deal. Carl Santana resigns it, or he goes back to Cleveland. And then, of course, you see Josh Naylor get traded from Cleveland to Arizona for a package that was pretty much nothing. So a very good trade for Arizona, and that part is they replace Walker with Naylor. But yeah, obviously some depth pitching signings, including Griffin Canning, who I'm sure we'll talk about. Will owe our king David Stearns a little bit of an apology there. And then obviously, Anthony Ghost, Luis L. Ortiz also signed as depth pitchers. So yeah, I'm sure we'll also talk about Pete, talk about Bregman, even though we have our doubts about that signing. But yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, I think we'll start with the apology, because I don't know why we ever doubted our king, David Stearns, for a second. So if any of you did not tune into the Griffin Canning live stream we did with Carson, which, by the way, sub to Mets Weekly if you have not already. And thank you to Carson for allowing us to go on his stream, because he was the one that had all the graphics and great setup, because as you can see, we are nowhere close to that level of graphics. I got to step up the game here for the channel. But we owe an apology a bit to Griffin Canning, because we were very down in the dumps on that live stream with the signing. But after doing a little bit of a deeper dive, which I was doing until 3 a.m., I'm not going to sit here and lie because I'm sick in the head. There is a little bit more than I thought to like about Griffin Canning. I'm not going to sit here and say that he is going to be an ace level pitcher. I'm not sitting here saying he's going to be a lights out pitcher from the bullpen, whatever it is. But all I could say is that I do think, after further review, he is a guy that would be better to utilize from the bullpen, because of the fact that I think you could maximize his value there. I think you could get a little bit more velocity up on the fastball, which would be the most important thing, considering that is his lesser pitch. And the real thing that they need to do is fix his four-seam grip, which there is a lot of tweets going around about how maybe you switch his four-seam grip to what Garrett Cole used or what Luke Weaver did, which I think he profiles very similar to that regard, because if you look at both of their Savant pages as well, it's very similar if you look at Luke Weaver's 2023 season to now his season this past season. If you look at 2023 to 2024 Griffin Canning, there's a lot of similarities there, and a lot of it has to do with the four-seam fastball. And I think the main thing that we discussed with Carson that is where you're really going to maximize his value is if you could ditch the sinker and mix in a cutter. I think that's going to serve him well, because I think if you could get something to tunnel the four seam with, tunnel all of his pitches a lot better with, it's going to get him to get a lot more outs. And it's either that or you get him to up the four seam usage. I'm scared about him utilizing the sinker and them trying to do that, because there is a little bit more of a base there. But if you get him to utilize a cutter, I think that's something that could be better. And another thing that, if they could try to get him to utilize a bit more, if you go back to, I'm trying to find which season it was, but there was one season he was really doing a good job getting a lot more break on his his slider, which if they could use that or get that going a little bit more, that as well would get him to be a lot more effective. I mean, even 2023, he was getting a lot more movement on that slider, getting a lot more vertical break. So if they could get him to make a couple of those adjustments, and obviously it's all easier said than done with Griffin Canning, but if you get him to use that, and I think a guy that you could look at, which this is where I did my little bit of deep diving. Genesis Cabrera, who they ended up signing, he utilizes that cutter. If you get him to, really get going with Griffin Canning and get that cutter to get him to utilize a cutter similar to Cabrera's, you have a very effective pitcher on your hands, and I think that this could be a good reliever option. I still worry about him being a starter, but as a reliever, I think there is something here.
Yeah, definitely. And I pretty much mentioned it right off the bat when we did when we did that podcast with Carson, that the type of money that he was making, $4.5 million, it was clear that he's going right into the bullpen because that is nowhere near starter money. Because like I mentioned last time, if you recall the last offseason when they signed Luis Severino, who came off just a horrible season with the Yankees, they signed him to a 1 year deal for 12 million. So 12 years, $4.5 million. It's a pretty big difference in money wise. So it's clear that he's going back to the bullpen. And I agree with you. I think him going to the bullpen is going to help. One, his fastball velo is only going to go up because if you look at his Savant page, his average around the fastball is 93.4 miles an hour, which for a starter in today's game is not good enough in terms of fastball velo. So if you place him in the bullpen, it's going to allow him to throw a bit harder because he's throwing a lot less pitches. So naturally, you'll see that velo going up. Obviously, like you also mentioned, in terms of the grip, it's more about the thumb placement. If you look at more of those Twitter threads, so if you can make an adjustment on that grip, I'm sure you'll see an improvement on that fastball. And then, yeah, also like you mentioned that sinker, it's got to go because that was his biggest hampering point last year. Because if you look at the numbers from Savant, a 429 batting average and a 441 expecting batting average, that sinker is holding him back by a lot. So I would just like it if he would just completely ditch the sinker. And then yeah, like you mentioned, and like Carson also mentioned, his two main pitches that he needs to rely on and he needs to up his usage is the changeup and the slider because the baseline numbers they weren't exactly great. The expected was a little bit better because it was a 259 average on the changeup, 247 expected, and then the slider was a 284 average, but a 249 expected. So definitely his best two pitches. And then even if you look, the whiff rates, those are the two highest. He's got a 20.8% whiff rate on the changeup and a 33.1% whiff rate on the slider. So if he could just make those few adjustments, increasing the usage of the changeup slider, getting rid of the sinker, fixing the four seam grip, obviously increasing his fastball velo as well. And now look, I mean, talking about it more and looking more at the numbers in depth and especially going over with Carson a little bit, I am a bit more intrigued about the signing. I'm still a little bit hesitant because it's cool. You can see that there's adjustments that could be made, but still, that's now up to Griffin Canning if he can able to make those adjustments. Because if he can't, well, then he's going to be the same pitcher that he was last year. But that's the point of the lab now. That's why we brought David Stearns here because we want to be viewed as an organization that could fix these type of pitchers on the cheap, and then we can, get the best value out of them possible. So we don't have to go out there and overpay for, top relievers on the market.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing that fans will not like to hear is that this is like similar to how they're going to build the bullpen. They'll maybe sign like a guy like Ryan Stanek to bring back, maybe bring back Rayleigh, maybe bring back some other names, or maybe they'll look at some new options that are going to sign in a similar price point, and they're not going to go after a lot of the top tier guys. Like, they're not going to go out and give Tanner Scott a multi-year deal. They're probably going to just find guys they could give either a 1-year deal or like a 2-year deal where there's an option in there, something along those lines. They're not going to commit money to a reliever because they do have Nunez coming back as well, who could be the high leverage guy. And on top of that, they're going to look to find value in the margins with guys like Canning, which again, there is stuff here because it's really about getting more run on the fastball as well. And that's really what it comes down to because, again, Luke Weaver's the guy that I keep mentioning, and there is a little bit of familiarity with some of the coaching staff here with the Yankees. So there are a lot of the same philosophies here. And I'm sure that's really the guy that they looked at and said, all right, if we could get him to be profiled similar to Luke Weaver, there is going to be a pitcher here. And if you look at the numbers with Luke Weaver, he sacrificed a little bit of being good with the control. You know, he went from walking, he started walking more batters, but he was generating a lot more swing and miss stuff. He got a lot more run on the fastball, and the fastball velo went up. It could be a combination of moving to the bullpen, and it also could be a combination of the fact that he did switch the grip, and it was allowing him to get a little bit more run, and maybe it was allowing him to maximize it a little bit more. And in terms of the arm angle too, I mean, it's not too far off. I think the other adjustment that you have to see from Griffin Canning is you have to see him mix the changeup and the slider more with the four seam, because if you could up the usage of both those pitches, I think you're going to see a lot more of an effective pitcher as well. So there are a lot of adjustments, but like we talked about, like you talked about, there's a lot of reasons why you bring David Stearns in. This is why the pitching lab exists, because you want to be able to find your ways to maximize these guys. And I'm sure they're going to have him work starting today, right now, even as we speak, that maybe he's throwing a bullpen and he's going to be working on these adjustments, because that's what he's going to have to do. And I think that you could, again, find in the margins guys along these lines to be a reliever in the back end of your bullpen, and it might not come right away. It might take until like May or June for him to start getting big outs for this team, but there are adjustments that could be made here that could make him at least a somewhat effective reliever if he's not going to be a high leverage guy. And I think there's value to that at the end of the day, because how much were we getting pissed off with guys like Danny Young down the stretch? How much were we getting pissed off with Phil Maton when he was losing it down the stretch? There is value in the fact that you could get just premier outs from him out of the bullpen. And if he does get a couple of starts just to be spot starts, fine. To me, I look more at Jose Budo, and I prefer him to be the guy that is the first man to switch from the bullpen back into the rotation as of today. But if he does get a couple starts, he gets a couple starts. Remains to be seen. But yeah, I think that's really all I have on Griffin Canning, unless he wanted to add in a little bit more. Just because we already did a live stream long enough about it, which somehow got more views than the Juan Soto stream. It is what it is there. But yeah, do you have any more thoughts with Griffin Canning before we move on?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, if they can get the best out of Canning, then you have a really good guy who is potentially going to be a very good, a very good shutdown reliever, which this team desperately lacked in the playoffs, because right at the end of that Dodgers series, we were pretty much only down to Stanek and Diaz as our only trustworthy relievers. So, and the bullpen right now is pretty much taking shape. I mean, obviously you got Diaz, you got Nunez who's going to come back, you got Budo, um, you got obviously Hennessy Cabrera. That's gonna be one lefty if he could crack it. Then who else am I missing? I mean, you got Reed Garrett as well. Obviously, now you have Canning. So the bullpen is starting to take a bit more shape. Obviously, I think I would still like to bring in another lefty, whether that be a guy like Brooks Raley, who I would like to come back, and also a guy like Stanek. But also, it depends on the money with those guys. Like obviously, because you don't want to overpay. I don't expect the money to be too crazy on those guys, but we'll see. Maybe David Stearns has a couple more slick moves underneath his sleeve, and we can at this point, I don't think we can doubt him with these pitching moves.
Yeah, 100%. Which I do want to get to the chat before I talk more about these players. Lulu, what's going on? Disappointed the Phillies got Luzardo. We'll talk about that a little bit. Raul giving what he wants this offseason, which we'll talk about that as well. Darren, what's going on? But yeah, speaking of lefties, though, from the bullpen, and one thing I'll say about Raley is I do wonder, I really worry that the Mets might have Ottavino hangover with Raley, and I'm not saying they're comparable pitchers, but it's like the age and everything. I'm scared they're just going to have a hangover there, and they're going to want to avoid it. But there is a lefty that they did sign that I do think could be a viable option from the bullpen, and fans are not going to want to hear this because they look at the fact that he is just a minor league signing. I think it was a minor league deal. I'm not sure if it was like a split deal or anything, but they got Brandon Waddell, who did spend years in the major leagues, spent some time with the Pirates, spent some time with the Twins, the Orioles, the Cardinals. So not too much, just 2 years of major league experience, a lot of bouncing around with teams. And truth be told, not effective really in his time during the major leagues. But he went over to the KBO, and something that we saw from Eric Fetty, he went over to the KBO, really made adjustments over there and found his game. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know what the adjustments that he made were, but all I could say from the numbers this past year, it looks like he limited the walks, got still a good amount of strikeout stuff. His Ks per nine were sitting at a 9, which is pretty much up to par of what he's been. He does not allow a lot of home runs. At least he wasn't over in the KBO, which again, I don't know if it's an adjustment thing or if it's him pitching in the KBO. And he did have a 3.12 ERA, a FIP at 2.87, an expected FIP of 3.39. There are things to like about Waddell, and again, I'm not going to sit here and say I know every little thing about him and tell you that I know, his pitch mix and everything, because what we saw in the major leagues last time could be very different from what we see when he comes back over, of course. But this is a guy that I do think the Mets maybe view as a viable lefty option out of the bullpen, whether it's depth. And again, maybe he doesn't work out in spring training, you get rid of him. But there is upside here because he still is, how old is he? He's 30 years old. 30 years old. There is a little bit of upside, especially because he did pitch in the KBO. And hey, Brooks Raley did the same thing. He was in the major leagues, went to the KBO, found his game, came back over, and then he ended up being one of the more effective relievers in baseball. I'm not saying he's going to be exactly that case like Brooks Raley was, but maybe he could be. And by the chance he is, then there you go. You have your Brooks Raley replacement at home now.
I mean, yeah, certainly the numbers did improve ever since going to the KBO because I mean, from a small sample size that he pitched in the majors in 2021, and it was only 9 and a third innings, so like I said, small sample size, but the Ks per nine went up from 6.75 to 9. The walks per nine went down from 8.68 to 1.32. Home runs went down also. So yeah, like I said, small sample size, but yeah, this is going to be a guy that's going to come to spring training. We'll see what he's got. If he impresses, then he'll go down to the minors, maybe have a chance to come up and contribute at some point. If not, then I'm sure the Mets will just probably release him.
Yeah, so there's really not too much to dive into there. You just hope that you hit on this flyer that you're taking here with Waddell. But with that being said, they did, of course, sign a couple of more depth players. I'll talk more about the arms that they signed. They signed Anthony Goes, who I think could be the most intriguing option because he's a fun story as well. Was a position player for the longest time. I think it was like in his mid-20s that he switched to being a pitcher within the Guardians organization, or it might have been another organization. The thing that sucks is that he was really able to throw 100 consistently. Then he got Tommy John, came back this year. The fastball velo dipped, which maybe he could get it back up there. I'm not entirely sure, but he is at age 34. The thing that you like about him is he throws hard. The thing that you don't like is he has no clue where he's going, and he has no consistency with his delivery, which does make him a little bit wonky with his location at times. Doesn't walk a lot of batters, but the problem is when he misses with his location, he is allowing pretty brutal contact. There is upside to him being a high leverage arm, but it's going to be a matter of finding consistency with his mechanics, and it's going to be a matter of getting him to get a lot more break on that slider, because if you look at his slider this past year, he was getting virtually no movement on that pitch at all, where if you go back to 2021 where he was the most effective, he was able to get a lot more break on the pitch, and that made him a lot more effective. So I think if you could do that, if not, you're probably looking at a guy that's going to have to add another pitch to his arsenal, because he's going to need to get something to get a lot more swing and miss stuff, because that's something he was sorely lacking this past season.
Yeah, he'll definitely probably have to include another pitcher in his arsenal because, I mean, as of right now, if you look at the Savant, it's only a four-seamer and a slider that he throws. So, and yeah, and the numbers, like, let me just take. Yeah, the numbers weren't particularly great. I mean, again, small sample size, but 500 batting average on the fastball, 464 expected batting average on the fastball, and then slider 385 average and a 304 expected batting average. So, yeah, I mean, look, if he can increase the velocity up again to around 100, or maybe he doesn't even have to be at 100, but 98, 99, he'll definitely have some improvements. But yeah, like you said, he'll definitely have to implement another pitch into his arsenal.
Yeah, if he's not able to get the velo up, he's definitely gonna have to look at that. I do like the fact that there is he does generate a good amount of ground balls, which I think he'll get a lot more outs here with a quality defense behind him. Not that the Guardians had a terrible defense behind him, but nonetheless, it is of course help there. But yeah, they did end up signing, and this one pissed me off because I got so happy with the signing because I got fooled with who it was. They signed Luis F. Ortiz. I thought it was Luis L. Ortiz, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh, they got a guy that I had in fantasy for a bit because he was doing so well in Pittsburgh. That's not the case. They signed Luis F. Ortiz, who did spend time with the Phillies this past season, has spent time with a couple other organizations, if I'm not mistaken. I do want to actually, get the exact stuff there on him just because I didn't get to. Yeah, I spent time with the Orioles, spent time with the Giants. Again, you're hoping for upside to hit here. He's 29, so maybe there is a little bit more upside here. The thing that you like about him is that he does not walk batters, and that's something that this bullpen desperately needs. The problem is he does not generate literally any swing and miss stuff pretty much, or it's at least rare that he does. He was generating a little bit more this past year, but usually that's something that he's not doing. He does allow a good, he doesn't strike out a lot of batters, and he does allow a good amount of hard to hit balls. So in terms of what you could see from improvement here, really it's just tunneling the sweeper better with the four seam. He needs to up his four seam usage, and I know that's really not an effective pitch considering the velo is pretty low, and it is something that he does need to find a way to utilize better to really maximize what he could be. But if you see an improvement there, maybe there's something. But again, I'm not sure what you're going to see from Luis F. Ortiz. He's honestly the least intriguing, in my opinion, out of the pitchers that they have signed recently. If it was Luis L. Ortiz, I would be to the moon about it, but unfortunately it's not. But yeah, your thoughts on Luis F. Ortiz?
I don't really have a lot of thoughts. I mean, like we said again, it's depth. If he works out, cool. If he doesn't, he leaves. But yeah, we'll see what type of adjustments he can make. He can make in the pitching lab. But yeah, other than that, not too much to talk about Luis F. Ortiz.
Yeah, which we will move on now to. They did add one more pitcher, which I didn't even really dive into at all in my own time, but Oliver Ortega, who spent time with the Astros, I believe he was out with a injury this past season, if I'm not mistaken. Either that or I'm completely going crazy there. But he's a guy that did actually pitch a good amount of effective innings with the Twins as well as with the Angels. I think he spent time with he did sign with the Astros, it looks like. I'm not sure if they just never called him up or if this is a scenario where he was injured. I do want to get a look at that if I can, if Baseball Reference wants to load. But in terms of the stuff that you saw in the major leagues thus far, he's a guy that does throw the ball hard, so that's always intriguing to add to your bullpen. Walks a good amount of batters, not something that you like, but at the end of the day, relievers do that more times than not. Did limit a lot of hard contact, and barrel rate does not generate a lot of ground balls, which is a little bit unfortunate. And I think there's some intriguing stuff here with what you could get. I think that he'll come up and give you a couple of quality innings at points. And again, they'll have to figure out some adjustments there. Maybe it's upping the four seam usage. Maybe it's upping the sinker usage to mix better with the slider and the curveball. But there is a little bit of there's a bit of upside here. Again, that's really all it is with all these guys is you hope you could hit on the upside. You hope they could, the pitching lab could find the adjustments needed.
Yeah, I think we can move on because I really don't have any thoughts about him.
Oh, you don't have thoughts? I was
No.
giving you the chance to jump in. I was also trying to look if he did spend time in the minor leagues this past year with the Astros. No, I think he was just strictly injured the entire year. So that would make sense considering yeah, he was injured the entire year. You just did not see him pitch at all. Yeah, he had Tommy John. So that's exactly why. So we'll see what there could be from him this year. But nonetheless, they did sign a couple of bats as well. They signed Jared Young, who is a guy that could play a couple different positions: first base, left field, second base, according to Baseball Reference. And again, hoping a guy that figured it out in the KBO comes over and could be a solid depth option for you. He hits the ball hard, and that's something that's intriguing in itself. Strikes out a lot, that you don't like. He does draw a good amount of walks. To me, this just screams of a very, 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 and I want to be very clear when I say this is a very poor man's either Max Muncy or Kyle Schwarber. I'm not saying he's going to come in here and hit like 20 to 30 bombs, because I don't think he's going to get that much of a leeway unless he blows the Mets out of the water in spring training. But he's a very intriguing option. I mean, he did have over 1,000 OPS in the KBO, did hit 10 home runs in the KBO, 39 RBIs, and all this in 38 games. So there is a lot of, again, you're going to hate the word, but it's the word of the episode here, upside. And even when he spent time in the minor leagues this past year in Memphis with the Cardinals organization, he did have some quality numbers: over a 900 OPS, over a 285 average. The on base is where you like it at a 411. Again, he draws a lot of walks. You just have to maybe see him cut back a little bit on some of the strikeout stuff that he's challenged by. But overall, I think that, again, there's something intriguing here, and you could get some serviceable MLB production from him if, you have to dig into the depth a little bit here.
Yeah, not a bad little signing from Jared Young. Obviously, from when he made his transition from to the KBO. I mean, did see some improvements in terms of the numbers. Obviously, the walks per nine the walk percentage jumped up from 6.4 to 12.4, so a nice little improvement. K percentage went down, still high, but you like to see that it went down from a 27.7% to a 20.7%. And yeah, like you said, gets on base, can hit for power. If he could come up here, maybe provides a little bit of production, you would like it. But again, another nice little depth piece, but added by Stearns.
Yeah. And then the final depth piece they added is a catcher in Chris Williams, who has not made his major league debut, so there's really not too much info on the guy. But in AAA this past year, had an 800 OPS, 461 slugging, 339 on base percentage, so he does get on base a good amount. 221 average with 17 home runs. So there is, again, something that could be here. I'm trying to stay away from the word so I don't say it the entire episode, but he could be the third or fourth catcher. There's really not a lot to dive deep into with Chris Williams here. I don't know if you have thoughts, but just thought I'd mention that they signed him.
Yeah, no, just more depth, like you mentioned. Nothing really more else to say about Chris Williams.
Which now will segue over into the conversation that I'm sure most of you are waiting on. If you have not even left the stream by now, which if you didn't, we appreciate you bearing through us going in depth an obnoxious amount on minor league moves. But the major league roster, obviously there are things that have been moving a bit slow outside of Griffin Canning. We're still waiting on the Mets to sign a pitcher. And then the first base market, like we mentioned, has heated up a bit, which does make it interesting to wait and see when will Pete Alonso end up getting his contract. What type of contract will he be getting? And truth be told, I think his value is, or the contract he's going to get rather, is not going to be what we initially thought, considering you're seeing guys sign for a very cheap price. And I think that first base is starting to be viewed as a less valuable position as we go along. And honestly, I've stood on my ground consistently this entire offseason. I would like them to be as patient as possible with Pete Alonso, because I do think you could argue he will circle back to the Mets with whatever offer he gets, and you dictate then if you want to match it or not. And if you do, he's back. If not, you let him walk because I really love the idea of trying to pursue Vlad Guerrero Jr. next offseason, or getting a guy like Murakami next offseason if all else fails, or Naylor, if he doesn't extend in Arizona. Obviously, he's a lesser player than Pete Alonso, but I don't hate the idea. To me, it still comes down to what will Pete Alonso get, because if he's signing for more than 5 or 6 years, I'm still not interested. I'm sorry. I think that 5 to 6 years is really the cutoff there, because you're looking at a guy that might DH towards the end of that contract. But yeah, we'll see how things go. But I think we're going to see a decision soon.
Yeah, I think Stearns and the Mets, I think they play this perfectly because, like you just mentioned, aging first baseman, MLB teams now are not viewing them because, it's, because especially with Pete, while he's been a decent defender, he's still not the greatest defender. He's a decent scooper, and then of course we saw the production from him go down a little bit. I know he still had a productive year, over 30 home runs last year, but like we mentioned time and time again during the regular season, his numbers with guys on base, they dropped a lot compared to 2023. So yeah, I think they play this market really well because obviously, and we mentioned, well, at least I mentioned at the start of the podcast that, teams have started to get a couple first basemen now. Like I mentioned, Paul Goldschmidt went to the Yankees on a 1 year, $12.5 million deal. Walker back to the Astros. So more and more suitors are starting to dissipate away from Pete Alonso. And because Carson tweeted this out yesterday, but teams without a viable first baseman for 2025: the Athletics, the Marlins, the Mets, the Pirates, and the Nationals. We know the Athletics not going to spend any money. We know the Marlins not going to spend any money, and we know the Pirates not going to spend any money. So really, the big two suitors, maybe three, because I know we've seen the Cubs in the past be interested, but I don't think the Cubs now sign Pete Alonso, considering they just shipped out Cody Bellinger after bringing in Kyle Tucker, and I'm sure they want to save money for next year when Kyle Tucker inevitably hits free agency, or maybe they sign him to an extension before free agency, but. Yeah, really, the only big two suitors for Pete that I see are the Mets and the Nationals. Now, look, could the Nationals just go out there and offer Pete a big deal? They could. They certainly could because they do have a lot of money coming off the books, considering that they have a very young team right now and they don't have guys tied up to big deals. Obviously, Patrick Corbin just his deal just ended, so that's money off the books. And look, it only takes one owner to go out there and blow Pete away with an offer, but like you mentioned, I don't want to sign Pete long term. Originally going into the offseason, I thought, okay, if you could get Pete on a 5-6 year deal at around $25 million, because I threw on the idea of like a 6 year deal or a 5 year deal for $125 million, which I would take. But considering how bad his market has fallen, I do think that you could probably get Pete around a 3 to 4 year deal, which I like because look, he is 30 years old and he is on the wrong side of 30. But if you sign to a 3 to 4 year deal, you're getting him on the right at the end of his prime. So if you could get a decent 30, 31, 32 years old out of him, and then obviously, and then if you could just get that 33 years old season out of the way, I would like that. If Pete is looking in for any more years in terms of 5, 6, 7, I would most likely stay away. And I don't see any team offering that unless, like I said, some owner is just desperate and comes out of the water and just blows Pete out of the water with a contract offer.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm kind of upset, to be honest with you, that they didn't get all over acquiring Josh Naylor, because your trade comparable would have been just like a competitive balance pick and Dom Hamill. That would have literally been it to get Josh Naylor. And to me, that doesn't take you out of the Pete Alonso running, because you could have had Naylor DH because he is not great in the field. You could have had him DH, and you could have had Pete Alonso play first base if you were to bring him back. I think the Mets should have been all over that deal personally, because at least it gives you leverage too in Alonso negotiations to say, well, we'll run with Naylor if you don't want to take our offer. And they could have maybe got him at an even more affordable price than they might find themselves landing him at. But nonetheless, they have to make a decision here because it's getting very thin. Your option is either bring back Alonso, or you trade for Yandy Diaz, or you get Nolan Arenado to play first base, or you sign Bregman and move Vientos to first. And to tell you the truth, I don't like any of those options outside of bringing back Pete Alonso. And as much as I want to bridge to Vlad, I don't know if I'm in love with the idea of getting Yandy Diaz entirely, because I get that he has had some solid seasons with the Rays, but he is up there in age. He is coming off a bit of a down year as well. Does not hit for that much power as well, which I do like some of that from the first base position. Your options are thin here. Your options are very thin, and there aren't a lot of suitors, but maybe the Cubs do sneak in and, try to offer something to Pete Alonso, or maybe there is a team that we're not expecting to maybe jump into the mix. Maybe the Mariners come into the mix at some point, but I don't know. It's such a tough decision here because of the fact that they probably have the same thought we do. Like, they want to wait for Vlad next offseason to just blow him out of the water and land him, because we talked about it last episode, I believe. If you want to be the Dodgers, you have to act like the Dodgers. And this is where I'm against signing Bregman, because you don't spend on the middle class free agents. You go out and you wait. You patiently wait for the top tier guys to come onto the market and hit the market, and then you go all out and splurge. You don't sign your Alex Bregmans. You don't sign these middle class guys. You wait your turn, and then you pounce when the free agents become available, the big free agents, that is. And that's how you build your team. You don't build it by giving, that's the problem. They gave out Starling Marte a 4-year deal, and now they're stuck with that contract. Jeff McNeil, they overpaid him. They're stuck with that. And if they brought in Bregman, there's a chance he's playing second base. So now you're talking 2 overpaid second basemen potentially. That's a lot of money tied up to contracts that you don't want.
Yeah, Bregman, I have no interest in bringing in unless it's like a short-term deal, like a 3-year deal with opt-outs. Then I have no interest in it, and even then, I don't think he gets a short-term deal. I just don't see it. I do
Yeah.
think just because of Bregman, the name value, he is a 2-time World Series champion. He's produced in the playoffs. He's had a really good regular seasons. I do think there will be a team and owner out there that overpays for Bregman, and I just don't see the benefit of him coming to the Mets because, like you said, if anything, he'll come here and he'll move over to second base, and then you already have Jeff McNeil here, so you're gonna overpay for 2 second basemen. Which, listen, like I've liked Bregman over the years, but he is a bit of a Crawford box merchant. If you take him out of Houston, I am interested to see how his power numbers go down by how much they do, but yeah, like I said, considering that I think he gets a long-term deal, I have no interest in bringing back Bregman. And in terms of like we mentioned with Pete, I would much rather Pete in that terms because I think Pete will get to a point where his market just drops down where I think he'll accept a 3 to 4 year deal. I think we'll have to wait on that because I think this is going to be one of those things where Boris, like we saw last year with Montgomery and Snell, I think they'll wait it out with him until possibly February when spring training opens up because I think that they'll just try to push it back, push it back, push it back as far as they can to see if they can get a long-term deal. I don't think anyone's going to offer that deal. So I do think ultimately that we'll see Pete come back to the Mets. And depending on what his money wise, like even if they sign Pete to a 3 to 4 year deal, I don't think that even takes them out of the running for Vlad next year. Because I mean, if you look at the money that they have tied up to their guys, they don't have big time money tied up to any starting pitchers unless they, magically go out there and sign a guy like Corbin Burns. But when you look at the money, $51 million to Soto next year, $34 million to Lindor. Then you got
The main thing you look at is
Nimmo.
Marte coming off the books.
Yeah, you got Nimmo for 20 million, Marte at 19 and a half, which you can hope you shed, McNeil at 12 and a half. So you don't have a lot of big time money tied up in position players. And especially like you said, if they can get rid of Marte and McNeil, that's a lot of money freed up. So, if you could so like Marte makes 19 and a half, right? So let's say if you could sign Pete for like around $25 million. So that covers a majority of Marte's contract, a little bit extra with Pete going to 25 million. Then McNeil, you could get off his contract. Then, you're gonna have money to sign Vlad next year. So yeah, if they could get Pete on a 3 or 4 year deal, I would take that. And yeah, it doesn't take him out of the running next year for Vlad. It doesn't. And if they could add Vlad next year and you move Pete over to DH, that's a stacked lineup. And like we talked about, if you want to go toe to toe with the Dodgers, you have to stack your lineup with power hitters and just guys who can hit in the clutch. Because and like you said, that also goes in part with not overpaying for the mid-tier market guys like a Bregman or going long term with Pete.
Yeah, with Marte, that's the thing that I look at the most, that his contract's off the books after this upcoming season. So it gives you the flexibility to bring in Vlad. And to me, yeah, I'd rather them, and I know Met fans aren't going to want to hear it because it requires patience, but I would rather them be patient and bring in Pete and Vlad versus Pete and Bregman. And I think that's not even a debatable conversation, because forget just the Crawford boxes for a second. His best years were with the juice baseballs. You're paying virtually for his defense. Like, that's what you'd be paying for if you signed Alex Bregman. And unless by some miracle the Mets, like you said, land Bregman on a short-term deal, they bring back Pete, and it doesn't take them out of the running for Vlad, and they build just a unbelievable super team for next season, where they get Vlad next offseason to add to Bregman, Alonso, Soto, Lindor, Nimmo, Alvarez, whatever, Vientos, all that they have here, then sure, not my money. If Steve Cohen's willing to just blow through the tax threshold, sure, not my money. But there are warning signs with Bregman that this contract is not going to age well. And we should learn our lesson here with how much of a bullet they dodged with not bringing back Javi Baez. We should learn the lesson with the Angels, who overpaid for Anthony Rendon. And I know a lot of that is an injury factor with him, but there were warning signs as well with Anthony Rendon, not nearly as much, but another guy that thrived mostly when the juice baseballs were a thing. There are warning signs that Bregman's contract is not going to age well. And I can tell you this right now, he is going to get ridiculed by this fan base. I would give it, if they sign him to, say, a 6-year contract, by year 2, year 3, I think you're going to start to see rapid regression, and fans are going to be pissed off with Alex Bregman. The numbers continue to decrease every year. I mean, his on-base percentage plummets every year. His OPS has been sinking every single year. And the power numbers are just not there. You look at his Savant page, and the exit velo numbers are just simply not there. You're paying for his defense at that point, and you're paying for a guy that maybe, sure, he doesn't strike out a lot, but I just don't love the idea of overpaying for a guy that you're paying for his defense and you're paying for him to be a contact hitter, because we have that at home. We already have that at home, and I'm more than okay with that. Sure, not the defensive aspect, but I would rather just wait it out and go for Vlad next offseason and bring back Pete easily. And I would rather I'd rather give the reins and run with some prospects at second base. I'd rather give Mauricio a look when he gets healthy next season. I'd rather, call me crazy, I would rather even see, because of the control they have on the contract, rather see Brett Beatty get reps at second base. Rather see Acuna get reps at second base, who has a good glove in his own right. And there's upside there, where Bregman, you know what he is. I'd rather run with the risk of Acuna and see what upside he got there than Alex Bregman. Because at the end of the day, if you don't get production from any of them at second base, you could find value. I mean, look at what they got with Jose Iglesias this past season. They got good contact numbers, and they got a guy that, vibes aside, played a good glove at second base. And you could find that potentially next offseason, whether it's getting Brandon Lau, who hits the market next offseason potentially on a club option, or if if they exercise that club option, maybe you trade for him. And I'm not in favor of some of these other options at second base, but the point is, second base is a position where you could find guys. Or maybe you do bring in Yandy Diaz next offseason and he plays second base. You could find guys within the margins to play there. And that's really the point of it, instead of overpaying for Alex Bregman.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back a couple years ago, another guy that we dodged the bullet, and again, it was a former Houston Astro who won the World Series in 2017 with them. But George Springer, I mean, George Springer back in the 2021 offseason signed, or 2020 off the 2020 offseason, signed a 6-year, $150 million with the Toronto Blue Jays. And at the time, we wanted him in center field. And sure, for the first years of that deal, it looked like a solid deal for the Blue Jays, but Springer's really fallen off. And now that $25 million, that's really hampering them in terms of guys that they can go after. So again, it's about not going and overpaying for guys in that mid-level market. Because I mean, even like you mentioned with the numbers going down for Bregman, I mean, when you look at his walk percentage, it went down from 12.7 to 6.9% this year. His Ks went up from 12% to 13.6. His walks to K ratio went down from 1.06 to 0.51. So I mean, look, if you bring in Bregman on a long-term deal, like the first 2 years, like you mentioned, they might look good, but in terms of that deal aging, I don't like that deal. And I just and to me, like I think the Bregman thing, I think that's all smoke personally. I just think because the Mets, especially because Boris knows, because he just dealt with Steve Cohen, negotiating that contract for Juan Soto. He knows that, Cohen can offer whatever. So I think just throwing the Mets in as name value, I think that's gonna, spark his the team's interested in him, and teams wanting to offer him a big deal. So that's really what I think the Mets Bregman connection is. So I don't see him going after him. Plus, if the Mets aren't willing to offer Pete a long term extension, I mean, well, a long term deal in general, I don't see them offering Bregman a long term deal as well.
Yeah, it would only be if they truly value Bregman over Alonso, which I would have questions if that was the case. Like truthfully, I would. And um, again, I get the value of run prevention and defense because we know that Stearns preaches that all the time. But I don't see a world where Bregman is more valuable because of the bat alone and the warning signs that regression is coming soon. I don't see where it makes sense, where it's lining up that he's the safer bet than Pete, which again, Pete, there's signs in his own right that there could be regression as well. I mean, he has not been the same since that rookie season, and it was going to be hard to replicate what he did. But there, like with the juice balls in general, those were his better seasons, and you've seen regression as each season has went with him. But again, I think that there's a safer bet with the power that Pete Alonso has versus Bregman, who doesn't hit the ball as hard, and you're going to see regression. But again, unless they value the defense that much, that's literally the only reason and justification I could have with that one. But yeah, in terms of the pitching market, because there is a question here. Do I think the Marlins will trade Alcantara given that he's coming off surgery? No, they would be dumb to trade him with low value right now. They have to give him some leeway, let him get some innings before trading him, because that would be just dumb to sell low on him right now. You're going to sell low on him even if he comes back and isn't thriving. You might as well wait to see.
Yeah, no, the Marlins are not trading Alcantara this year. It'd be dumb for them. Look, they probably eventually will trade him off because they're the Marlins and they don't like to hand out big time contracts for anyone. But yeah, it would be dumb for them to sell low on him because we saw him back in 2022 when he won the Cy Young, how dominant he was. I'm sure, and look, maybe he'll never get to the dominant point that he was in 2022, but I'm sure that he'll come back next year stronger. He'll have a decent season, and then next offseason or possibly at the trade deadline is when you capitalize and trade him for a decent haul of prospects.
Yeah, if that ends up being the case, and you're also saying a lot of people were saying Marlins would not trade in division, but they traded Real Muto to the Phillies and now Luzardo. Yeah, but you have to take into consideration with Luzardo, that was an overpay of a trade. And as much as Luzardo, I think, does have a lot of good upside there, and I personally would have loved Luzardo, to tell you the truth, on the Mets. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, he sucks now that he's on the Phillies, because there is upside there. But he also did deal with a lot of injuries, and he's a guy that has dealt with a lot of injuries in general in his career. They did give up a very, very significant haul, honestly, for a guy that is coming off a lesser season, and the in division tax is a thing. Like, I believe it. When the Mets wanted Real Muto, they were demanding like Noah Syndergaard from the Mets. So again, there is that factor to it. Like, you're probably looking at, if the Mets were in on Luzardo and say they made the trade, you're probably looking at a guy like Gilbert potentially going the other way with a lower end prospect. And to that, no, I'd rather find a guy that has either less trade value, that's out of the division, or I'd rather just go out and, wait the market on some of these other free agents. And again, I get the upside with Luzardo only being 27 and the fact that he does throw electric stuff from the left side, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't have gave up Gilbert and another prospect for Luzardo. Do you disagree with that, or?
No, pretty much same with me. I like Luzardo, but again, it's the concern with the injuries. I mean, and the Phillies did give up a pretty good haul. I mean, they gave up their fourth prospect in Starlin Caba, shortstop, and then they gave up their 23rd prospect outfielder, Amarin Boyd. So yeah, I mean, look, if he works out for the Phillies, he stays healthy and he's able to find his rhythm again, then cool. The Phillies already added to their stacked rotation, but yeah, I mean, in division taxes, I think, like you said, the Mets probably would have to give up a guy like Gilbert. So, listen, would have I liked to get Luzardo? Sure, but there's still other guys on the market which the Mets could, spend either money on or potentially make another trade like a Luis Castillo type. So losing out on Luzardo, while sure it would have been nice to have him, but it's not the end of the world missing out on him.
Also, a pretty fun fact: he might not pitch well, honestly, Luzardo, in Citizens Bank Park, which I'm looking at some of the numbers with how many home runs he would have allowed in each ballpark. In 2023, his last healthy season, he would have allowed 30 home runs compared to the Marlins Park, where it's 20. You're talking 10 home run difference there, which, again, I like Luzardo, and it's a good ad for them, but there could be worries with him pitching in a smaller ballpark that you can't run away from, which it obviously is different here, but I wouldn't have. Yeah, I'd rather them, hopefully, and if it's not the trade market or waiting for a market to cool down, hopefully they could somehow get Sasaki to come here. Like, hopefully they could persuade him to sign a contract here. That's really the guy I'm holding out hope for, because I do think there's ace upside there. And if not, then you're probably looking at them. I mean, it really depends who signs first, Sasaki or Burns, which I would lean Sasaki at this rate, considering the fact that the Burns market is really, really quiet. Like, we have not heard any teams really even linked to Burns at all. I think that if you don't land Sasaki, I really think there's a world where Burns does end up actually getting that Snell type contract where, there's opt outs after each year for 3 years, and you could get him at like 40 million AAV. And again, I'm more than okay with that if there's opt outs after each year.
Yeah, because I think like a week ago when Stearns was still there at the winter meetings, he mentioned, because obviously he was asked about Sasaki, and he talked about Sasaki as an added bonus that if they get him, so which again it makes sense because there's no money leverage in this situation because Sasaki is coming over here a couple years earlier, so he's going to sign a minor league deal type like similar to what Otani did, so he's going to make around like 6 million, 7 million, so the numbers wise in terms of the money being offered to him, it's not that big of a difference. And at least good news for the Mets that they made it to the second round of negotiations. So they had a meeting with Sasaki. I'm still not confident that he's coming here just because I think he still favors the West Coast, and I still view the Dodgers and Padres as the 1A, 1B favorites to land Sasaki. If they can, cool. But I think, and like I mentioned this when we did the podcast with Carson, I think the ultimate plan is I think they add one more starter, whether that's trading for Castillo, signing Mania, signing Corbin Burns to a short-term deal if his market falls, if it falls to that. And I think they'll get one of those guys, and then Sasaki will be the added bonus. But yeah, especially like the Corbin Burns thing. If his market keeps falling, which at this point, there's no reason to not expect that. And he's willing to settle for a 3-year deal at $40 million a year with like opt outs after the first 3 years. I fully want the Mets to go after Burns at that point because again, like he's 30 years old, so Sure, he's on the wrong side of 30, but you're gonna catch the tail end of his prime. So, and listen, is there still an injury risk? Sure, there always is because listen, a pitcher could, tear something in their elbow at any time, but compare a 3-year deal to a 7-year deal, the injury risk is a lot lower. And like I said, you're going to catch the tail end of his prime. So you're still going to get some very good productive years out of Corbin Burns if you sign that type of deal. And again, this is like what we mentioned with Steve Cohen, similar to what they did with Scherzer and Verlander. Offer those last years, weaponize your money, and go a lot up around the AAV to convince him to come here. And I think Corbin Burns would come here on a short term deal. If there's opt outs after the first 3 years with a higher AAV.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. That they have to be in on him if that's where the price point got to. But yeah, we're starting to see this roster really shape up. I mean, it's feeling like it's gonna come down to if they bring back Pete or not. That could really be the only other shakeup. Maybe they get Pete and Bregman, which again I've voiced my opinion on, but I can only control so much. I'm hoping that you're right, and I would tend to agree with you that the Bregman thing is just smoke because, uh, if they really want Bregman this badly, I feel like a deal would have got done at this point, or I feel like we'd be hearing a lot more about the offers and his market in general with how much money he wants and all that stuff. So I agree with you that I'm leaning towards it being smoke mostly, which I could be entirely wrong with that, but we'll see. But yeah, we're really seeing this roster shape up. There still could be moves with Marte if they find a way to shed him off the books for relievers, which if that ends up being the case, then they're going to have to address another bench piece, which they probably do have to address a bench piece to begin with, which maybe it's Iglesias coming back, who knows, but we're really just looking at, in terms of like the main pieces, a starter and then a first baseman or third baseman, and then we really are going to know what this roster is, and it's just going to come down to filling in the depth at that point, which I'm excited about, but I'm also not, because then we're going to have less to talk about until February when spring training starts to come along. But things are starting to move quickly, and I'm so excited for the season to start up again.
Yeah, because we got to watch a certain favorite hockey team in about half an hour, so that's gonna be very fun. But yeah, I mean, look, the lineup is starting to take shape. Obviously, the outfield's been set now for a while. Obviously, Nimmo in left. You could have that nice platoon of Siri and Taylor in center. Then, of course, our big time addition of Juan Soto is gonna be manning right field for the next 15 years, which is gonna be very lovely to see. And then, yeah, I mean, the infield pretty much is set. I mean, third baseman, obviously, it's going to be Vientos, short, Lindor, obviously. Second base, we still don't know. Obviously, we still have guys on the contract. I mean, Acuna's still here, McNeil's still here. I would love to see McNeil get moved and then potentially, bring back a guy like Iglesias and have that second base platoon of an Iglesias and Acuna. And then Pete, I mean, the first base, obviously, we'll see. I do think ultimately Pete comes back, so that will fill the spot. Then, obviously, we got Alvy catching. And then, fill a DH, whether that be, signing a guy like Jock Peterson, bringing back Jesse Winker, or, making a trade for another guy, or, maybe someone from internally comes up and takes the DH spot. And then, yeah, add a couple more bullpen pieces, add a starter or two, and then, yeah, address the bench, and then we'll be ready to go in time for spring training. And listen, we're almost there, about like 56, 55 more days away from pitchers and catchers reporting in Port St. Lucie. So, each day closer we get, the more excited we get. So, and I'm ready for this season. I am, because we just came off a really exciting season last year where 89 wins, NLCS appearance. Now listen, the Mets are in a spot next year where, if they make a couple more nice additions, they'll be viewed as a contender for the NL East, and then we go from there.
Yeah, 100%. It's just really trusting the process here, which um it's great that we could even say that, because it's nice to actually have a clear direction with an organization for once, which we'll address this comment before we head out of here. Would you wait for Sproat? And I'm assuming you mean Tong. I think you mean Tong,
Yeah, I think
because
he
I
makes
don't know who else it could have mean. But to develop, or would you trade them in a package for Scooble? To me, it is always proven talent over prospects, and I love the upside of both of those guys. But if Scooble can be had and you have to give up a guy like Sproat, then so be it at that point. I mean, you're getting a guy that is 26 years old, and in his prime. Is Scooble 26 or 27 even? Like, either way, you're getting a guy, he's 28. I mean, I still would do it. He is still in the heart of his prime, coming off some really, really good seasons with the Tigers. I would do it personally, but I also don't think it's realistic. I think the Tigers, now that they made the playoffs, are going to try to run it back with Scooble and try to run things back in general. If, they start to slip away again at the deadline this year, maybe that conversation could be entertained again. But for right now, I would do it if it was an option. But um, yeah, that's just my opinion. But I do like what Sproat could be, and I think he's going to be a dark horse for this team this season. Honestly, either getting quality outs from the bullpen or getting quality starts from him.
Yeah, I like Sproat. I think he could be a very valuable piece coming up this year and producing, whether that's in the rotation or out of the bullpen. And I would trade that package for Tariq Skubal, but like you mentioned, I don't think it's realistic. There's just no way that the Detroit Tigers, after coming off a surprise playoff appearance, trade the AL Cy Young Award winner for that. I just don't see it. Would I love Tariq Skubal? Absolutely. I just don't think it's realistic. I mean, like you said, if we get to the deadline and that type of package is, if the Tigers are willing to take that type of package, then sure, absolutely. Considering that you do have another year of Skubal under control for next year, but yeah, I just don't see that happening at all.
Yeah, that would really push his team to another level if he was available at the deadline. And also that gives you more time to really see you know if Sproat should really be untradeable or not. And uh obviously that could hurt his value in a potential deal, but there is that factor to it. And we're not saying Scooble's being traded. We're saying that if there was the world where Scooble is available, that's what we're talking about here. Mets aren't best third in the NL East with this group of misfit toys pitching staff. We'll see about that one. I personally think that right now, I would probably agree they're the third best team in the NL East right now. I think they could maybe finish above. Um, Honestly, I really think that there is a world they could finish second. I don't know if it's the Braves or the Phillies, just because the Braves are the best team. It's just injuries that they really uh, that could hold them back, and then the Phillies, uh, they're just honestly a wild card of seeing what they get in general from that team, because there's a lot of older guys on that team that could regress. Like, it's a realistic thing that could happen. I think their pitching staff is great in terms of the rotation, but when you look at that lineup, there is guys that could regress. Harper has dealt with injuries in his own right as well lately. He does have a back issue, which could spark up again, considering he does have a violent swing. So there is a world where they could finish second in the NL East, in my opinion, maybe even first if all things go right. But I would lean to say I would probably agree with it that they're third. But like we say all the time, get into the playoffs and anything could happen. We just saw it this past year. They got in as the last team, and look at where they got. Look at where they got. They beat a team that was considered better than them in the division. To me, it's about finding, getting hot at the right time with a combination of a good deadline. And I think that could take them the distance, because if you look at what they did this past deadline, it really helped them, accelerate them further into the playoffs, which I know Maton wasn't as good down the stretch. But if you look at Stanek, who gave them quality outs in the playoffs, if you look at Winker, who had a lot of good at-bats in the playoffs. So, you get down the stretch and, anything can happen there.
Yeah, I definitely do think they're the third best team as of now, but like we just mentioned, like the offseason is nowhere near over yet, and spring training doesn't even kick off till late February, so there is still time. I mean, obviously, look, I want to start seeing deals happening soon, just because you don't want to wait too long, because then quality pieces are going to start coming off the market. But listen, we still got time, so let's just wait and see. Stearns is not sleeping like a bunch of Mets Twitter is suggesting. He's well at work right now. I'm pretty sure, looking at potential steals of guys or potential trades that can be worked on. But listen, we just got to be patient. This is not NHL free agency. This is not NBA free agency where guys come off the market as soon as they get on. It will take some time. Listen. If we get closer and closer to spring training and we still don't have an ace caliber type pitcher, then I'll be worried. But I don't see that happening. I think we'll be ready by the time spring training comes along.
Yeah, like there's really no other teams that are making a lot of moves in general outside the Yankees because they have to because they lost out on Juan Soto. Just thought I'd throw that reminder out there, but um, which also if the Mets had the offseason they were having after losing out on Soto, we know that Twitter would just be like, "Lol, Mets getting washed players." But that's I digress with that one. That's really the only team though that's been like making a lot of moves. Like as much as everyone's like, "Oh, well, Stearns is sleeping," who else is making moves? Like I'm sure Orioles fans are probably pissed off the most because that's a team that should be really aggressive in the market, trying to get better. Considering the AL is wide open. I mean, the Yankees are the only threat in that league. So I'm sure Orioles fans are pissed off. Imagine, and Phillies fans until today were pissed off for the longest time. You got to just be patient with the MLB market because, like you said, this isn't NHL, this isn't the NBA, this isn't the NFL where everyone signs the first like week of free agency, and then there are guys that slip through and you could find in the margins to get on PTOs like Eric Robinson, who the Rangers should have got, but either way, uh, yeah, the MLB is just a different animal, and I hate how slow it is. Like, believe me, I want all these guys signed just as much as everyone, so we don't have to sit here and wait and see and play the guessing game of what the roster is going to look like. But at the end of the day, this is what it is, and you just got to be patient. For all we know, the Mets make a trade today, and if it's not today, maybe it's next week. Who knows? But patience is what it matters. If the market starts to heat up a lot and other teams are making moves and the Mets are still not, then yeah, then I'll be worried. But for right now, the market's slow. I know the first baseman market really heated up yesterday, but Pete's still free agent. Like, just be patient.
Yeah, yeah, no, just stay patient and listen. Like I said, we'll be ready to go by the time spring training kicks around. So listen, the days get closer and closer, and the excitement only builds. We'll see what happens in terms of Pete. I do think he'll be back. We'll see what happens in terms of the starting rotation. But yeah, let's go.
All right. That's where we're going to wrap it up. We appreciate you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. Be sure to leave a like if you have not already. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Like I said, 500 subs by opening day. That is the goal as of today. So let's see if we could do that. Spread the word about the channel as well. We really would appreciate all that other stuff if you could. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching, and we will see you guys in the next one.